the risk and the real danger of a world recession next year.
This as we see the world's global financial chiefs gather in Washington for the IMF meeting.
What we see is a fundamental shift from the world of the last decades that was relatively predictable to a world more volatile, more fragile, with consequences that we have to wrestle with, grapple with here in DC during this week.
Things are moving fast in the international economic debate. It has been getting gloomier by the week. On the eve of a meeting of finance ministers at the International Monetary Fund in Washington, the language of international economic bodies is noticeably gloomier than it was even a couple of weeks ago.
Over these last 3 years, we lived through unthinkable events that are having significant consequences. COVID, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and all of this has driven people into a very difficult place. They're exhausted and they have to cope with a cost of living crisis.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, the gloom is increasingly being reflected at home.
The world is bracing for another global downturn. That's the truth of it. We've seen in recent commentary from the OECD and the World Bank and the IMF that the prospects for a recession in some of the major economies of the world has edged over from possible to probable, and that has obvious implications for us as well. You know, it's going to be difficult to begin.
Treasurer Jim Chalmers leaves Australia tonight to also attend the IMF meeting in Washington. Before he left, he was doing some more of the political legwork to prepare people for his first budget in 2 weeks' time. There's been quite a lot of legwork, as well as quite a lot of kite flying from the new Treasurer in the past few weeks. Today, he was ramping down expectations about the global economic outlook.
If it goes that way, as many expect, this will be a very different downturn to the two others that we've had over the course of the last decade and a half. This one is an inflation shock, and the risk here is a hard landing around the world brought about by the blunt and brutal, but in some ways necessary, tightening of monetary policy.
It's been a long time since we heard an Australian Treasurer talk about a hard landing. Understand that what Jim Chalmers is talking about is the risk of a rather savage global recession.
I would encourage you to expect.
Little wonder that Chalmers is toning down what was already modest language about the ambitions of this budget.
It won't be fancy, it won't be flashy, it will be responsible, it will be solid.
Not fancy, not flashy, and not making any radical changes to the government's position on tax. For the past couple of weeks, speculation has been rife about whether the government would announce it was dumping or modifying the tax cuts for high-income earners due in 2024. Labor has not always been fully committed to what are known as the Stage 3 tax cuts.
Good morning. Ready to go? We think that Stage 3, at a cost of some $95 billion down the track, is really a triumph of hope over economic reality.
Stage 3 is the least responsible, least affordable, least fair and least likely to be effective because higher income earners aren't as likely to spend in the economy as workers of more modest means.
Labor eventually supported the Stage 3 tax cuts going through Parliament on the basis that it didn't want to hold up tax cuts for those on lower incomes.
Now, Jim, here.
Hi Natalie, how are you?
Good, how are you? Nice to meet you.
As the election loomed, it committed to delivering the cuts if it won.
These are not easy decisions, they're big decisions, but this is the right decision that we are making today, weighing up a whole range of considerations.
The government has been happy to let the speculation fly about the future of the cuts in recent weeks. It has never said it would dump or modify them, or even that it would set out its plans in the budget. But it was happy to fly a few kites, particularly after the disastrous mini-budget announced in the UK a couple of weeks ago.
Well, first of all, as you know, Laura, our policy on those tax cuts hasn't changed, but I think some of the broader points that you make are right. You do need to make sure that you've got fiscal and monetary policy working together. The fact that that's not currently the case in the United Kingdom, I think, is a cautionary tale. about the possible costs and consequences of not striking the right balance there.
Ever since that interview, the Treasurer has maintained the same language. The government did want a debate about whether the tax cuts should be modified or repurposed before they come into force in 2024. But the story was often racing, and the journalistic speculation went into overdrive that there was an immediate decision looming.
The government hasn't changed our position.
By Friday, even the Prime Minister saying the government hadn't changed its position was being reported as a sign that the government was about to change position.
Another news station.
By Sunday, saying the same thing seemed to finally kill off talk of an imminent change.
Well, our position hasn't changed. So it's very clear. These are due to come in 2024. We're producing a budget in October 2022.
None of this changes the broader point the Treasurer made about the cautionary tale from the UK. That is, the tale of potential conflict between the central bank trying to slow the economy and inflation through higher interest rates, and the government speeding it up with more spending and less tax. In Australia's case, the government has long pledged to give cost of living relief to households, that is, make some things cheaper. That runs in exactly the opposite direction to what the Reserve Bank is trying to do by putting interest rates up.
What we'll do in October is we'll provide cost of living relief where we are supremely confident that it won't make the job of the Independent Reserve Bank harder. And the way you do that is you provide cost of living relief in a way that has an economic dividend.
Jim Chalmers says the cost of living relief with an economic dividend includes childcare, education and medicines. They might not fuel inflation, but they're also not measures likely to stave off the impact of the much bigger issue now confronting us all, a likely global recession.